I'm Averie.
And I'm Mel.
This is the Veda Lounge podcast.
All things Vedic, cosmic, and magic.
For yoga teachers, entrepreneurs, creatives, and coming back to your own center.
We explore themes on living like you practice to knowing your nature.
Join the conversation for an embodied homecoming to illuminate your radiance.
Through getting nerdy with Vedic sciences and self-discovery, cozy into your cosmic cadence. Hello, welcome back to the Veda Lounge podcast. It's Mel here.
And Averie, hello.
So it's interesting, as Averie and I were talking about what to discuss today, it's crazy because right before I got on here, I was dumbing out a little bit because I've been super booked out this morning, but dumbing out on social media for a moment, and I saw this feed. I'm in a group with yoga studio owners across, I think honestly probably the world, I don't know, but it was such a frustrating post to witness. It was basically in summary about how with yoga teacher, it was like a game that someone was putting into their YTT or their yoga teacher training about like archetyping. She called it the problem child yoga student. And there's like 38 comments on there that were just talking about or like joking and making fun of people, whether it's like they're in their own practice or, you know, beginners going to non-beginner yoga classes or sweating, you know, in a studio but not cleaning up their sweat, which, yeah, that's gross, but like at the same time, just so missing compassion. It just bugs me because
I feel that it's missing the point is what it is it not? It's pretty far off the mark from what yoga is. And I think that's why it's so frustrating to witness, because then you witness people who I'm going to assume are studio owners and people who run programs and are supposed to hold a healing space. And yeah, I'll be honest, I've seen memes like that too before, like yoga related memes. And we tread a really thin line. You tread a very, very thin line there. And like you said, it can get real icky real fast.
Well, we wonder why people don't feel welcome or like comfortable, and is it the student that's the problem, or is it that the teacher doesn't know how to orient in different settings? Like one of the comments was, you know, again, I can't remember all the names they were giving these types of people, but someone pouring out after class about their life story. And yes, it's really important of treading that line of holding boundaries, and here are the protocols and how this flows, and staying in our scope of practice first and foremost. But we can have compassion. And I think for a lot of people who are new to yoga, there's already this sense of uncertainty of the space. Like, is it going to get really weird and woo-woo? Or what if I'm the only person who's not flexible? And so they come compounded with these fears as it is. And I feel like as teachers, it's our job to create spaces where people feel welcomed, you know, taking responsibility for this space, empowering people to be in their agency through their practice, and honoring the vulnerability that it can be to do these practices, and recognizing that we're, you know, if you're offering a solution and you're helping people who come have problems. We're human, we're dynamic, dualistic. So
what's interesting is you mentioned the word vulnerability. And as I'm thinking back of all the examples you gave, right? The person who is sweating too much, the person, right? That's born. I mean, imagine how vulnerable you have to be knowing that you are an extremely sweaty person to walk into that yoga class. There's a lot of self-consciousness around that. Yeah. Right. And so that was an inability to meet that vulnerability. Somebody who, you know, like you said, comes to you at the end of class and divulges maybe a lot of information, maybe a little bit too much information. It's vulnerability. I love that you mentioned that, because are we as teachers, are we just losing touch with the ability to meet that vulnerability with compassion? Mm-hmm. Is there sort of a disconnect there? Because that's what it seems like to me in all of these instances, or like you mentioned, the big one, right? Somebody who is not following the teacher's direction and moving in a way that maybe suits them better. So being in their own practice or honoring their own body is vulnerable. That takes braveness, but then we're gonna, yeah, I don't know. That's a tough one.
And if you own a hot yoga studio or if you're teaching yoga that creates intensity, like, duh, people are going to sweat. I don't know. It's like those fine details that it's like, well, duh. Or, like you just pointed out with people in their own practice, yoga is about befriending our bodies and coming back home to our own agency through the detachment of outcome, through the detachment from performance. And I get it. I get it. We live in the West and I get it. People are, yes, and I mean, I've owned several studios. I can tell you stories of like really wild out there things, but at the same time, there's immense compassion because people are on their own journeys and it's so countercultural to meditate, to do practices that are so gentle and not about achievement, right? But just about serenity and coherence.
What I really, I mean, I think we talked about this last week, was a lot of the barriers that we create, right, to yoga in the West. And all I think this does is create barriers. If we're telling you, you have to move a certain way, don't move in your own way. Don't come to class if you sweat too much. Don't talk to me after class. I don't want to, that's all we're doing is just making it less,
Transactional.
right. It's very transactional and it's not inclusive in that manner either.
Yeah,
So
I remember
do better. Do better.
I had a client years ago who told me about how she went to a studio or she went to a class and she was excited. She gets to class and the teacher looks at her and says, "Are you sure you can do this class? Do you know what class this is?" And like looked at her body and she was like, and here's the thing. I understand that teachers will hide behind the excuse around safety with this stuff, but there's a way to disclose, or how about just teach invitational, empower that client who may be coming to a what you would say more advanced class, empower them to meet themselves so they can, like, they deserve to play with progress and taste different things. I mean, who are we to say you're not enough for this class, you're not enough for that? It's not a framework that I operate from, so it just blows my mind. But I remember her sharing that and just how big of a deal, thank goodness she had such a foundation already in her own practice, that comment could have completely derailed someone. It would derail me. I'd be like, what?
I would never go back.
No,
I
yeah.
would be so embarrassed. I would be so embarrassed.
Yeah. It
That
we
hurts my heart a bit.
like you said, I mean, it's about doing better. And I think that part of the reason we see these issues is because we are, as a collective, we really get conditioned on putting identities into boxes or thinking that this is only for this person, this only belongs here. And we lost the critical thinking in our culture that, like, people can be dualistic or dynamic and be multifaceted, or yoga isn't just for this, but it can expand into other places or with all unique bodies and humans.
Well, and I mean, didn't you literally just come from teaching yoga to law enforcement from the past week? So that's a perfect example of, like, it doesn't have to just exist here and be this way. And the student doesn't have to fit this mold of whatever it is. It's bendy, athletic, or it's no, you're a gentle student. It's like your student can just be literally anyone.
So speaking of last week, yeah, so I had the privilege to teach for Team One Network. So it was training law enforcement trainers, and others in the industry. And it's so fascinating to see how, whether it's that community or any of these communities, like, most people are seeking vitality and wellness or peace, right? Like, they want to have coherence and feel good in their bodies and feel stable. And it is all about the language and how we deliver this stuff, because I don't know if people follow me on Instagram. I shared the video from Team One, but it was so cool because it's like all this intensity and, like, firearms training and all this stuff. And then all of a sudden it's like yoga with me. And then it goes into like, and it shows like we can, one, yoga is a human birthright, first and foremost. but that too, we can bring the myriad of uh, expressions of health to any community. And even though, like, a lot of times I've gotten with my work with the military is like that it's too fluffy or it's too soft, but really it's about being malleable. It's about learning to be adaptive. And the one thing that we all have is a nervous system. So that's usually what I lead with this stuff. But you're right, absolutely.
I love that you say they call it soft and fluffy. And there's something that you had said to me in the very beginning of my yoga teacher training years ago, and it was soft things don't shatter. And
Right.
so when you talk about like adaptability and malleability, that's all it really is. It's not this soft, fluffy, or it doesn't have to be. It absolutely can be in the space where it wants to be, in the space where that's, what someone is seeking. Sometimes my yoga is soft and fluffy, right? But it all comes down to community that we're serving, right? The people that we're serving, and then adapting to fit. So share a little bit. I haven't talked to you much since you came back. So how was it? Like, how did it, what was your experience like working with the community? I know that you've done so much work with that community in general, but maybe share for people listening.
I think that it's important to note that when delivering to communities that maybe perceive this stuff as fluffy or out of touch, even, it's very important to have cultural literacy on who you're teaching. And I'll kind of backtrack before I go into just this past week. Is that with years of working with the US Army and with the military in general, one thing that I learned or figured out really early on is the importance to speak to what they understand. And over years of kind of fulfilling these unit requests, Wounded Warrior Project, out like kind of these on the outside, when I finally started really delivering within and training leadership, by using the doctrine, so to speak, right? Using the FM or the manuals that the Army or the military uses to train their soldiers, merging the language of mindfulness and yoga with language they're already familiar with was essential. And when I started doing that, because I was training and equipping leadership in mindfulness and mental performance, so education, and this is kind of what I did last week, was I was teaching tactical mindfulness, which you guys know. I mean, it's pretty much yoga, right? But if I go in there, I'm like, we're gonna have a workshop on yoga. And to be honest, I think the ratio, like the room was like, probably 30 and above. Maybe there's like 5 women in there, 2 women. It was not, it was a very tactical, masculine environment. And so being able to help them understand that, okay, we all got a nervous system. Let's talk about it. Let's build some understanding about what that is. So when I go and do these talks and these trainings, or even when I teach, because we did some experiential stuff, we even talked about tapping, right? It's coming from the framework of what are they already familiar with. A lot of places when we talk about agencies, law enforcement, or the military, there's already topics on suicide prevention and resilience. And honestly, for a lot of people, it's kind of like, oh, okay, here we go again on this topic. But they're familiar with some of these conversations. And so what I do is I help connect familiar concepts of resiliency to what and why we're doing what we're doing. I give context. So with last week, it was about optimizing marksmanship, so mindful marksmanship. So how do we use this for weapons qualifications and better utilization and precision with firearms, which I know might sound kind of wild, but that also, a lot of the traits with, if you've trained with firearms or you've done any of that work, you know that mindfulness and meditation have a huge bridge of connecting into that. So it's taking things that they're familiar with and then bringing the awareness on using our bodies, but what I call it is our inner referral skills, the human weapon system, right? And I got that term from General Hibbard in the US Army, right? The human weapon system. But how do we optimize that? And I could go on and on. As you've seen, I'm already going on and on. But this is like what I do is I help them connect the dots.
But it's cultural literacy that gets you there, right? It's understanding a population and how to speak to them that invites this set of tools, right? So that they can utilize them. And, it's so, so powerful when you talk this way. And even some of the things that you just said, I'm like, I have no idea. I have no idea what that even means. But to the people who you're delivering it to, it absolutely lands in a way that is so different. I mean, oh my, could you imagine if you walked into that room and you started teaching them and you were just like speaking in Sanskrit? Like,
Well,
let's go with the most outlandish. But that's right where we learn, or where we learn to really connect and speak to the individuals that are in front of us. That's where the magic happens. That's when they're able to internalize and really begin to understand.
well, this is where in our culture right now, you have so many words for the same stuff, whether it's autogenic training, somatic, mindful movement to yoga itself, right? There's so many interchangeable conversations happening. And I see it as a pro and a con, right? Like the con is that it creates more confusion. And how do we really fine tune the modality itself so it can be scaled? That's a con when we have so many different expressions. And I know that IYT and other places are trying to orient and work with that. But on the pro of it is that by connecting the dots to things people are already familiar with, immediately that barrier comes down where they can do it in a way that meets them where they're at. So if I was going to work with corporate wellness, for example, which that's a whole arena that needs a lot of support, right? You're talking about organizational health, proactive health, how to, instead of outsourcing the corporate wellness services, how can we insource through training the people who are the leaders and the team and going into working with them? But you got to know, well, what are the metrics the company's dealing with? What are the interests and the mission of this company? So you can align and collaborate, but also, as I say this, be aware so you can also say, you know what, this community is not for me, or I don't really want to, I don't need, I don't resonate with teaching there or working there. Because that's another reason why understanding who you're speaking to is so important, because is it a match for you? And are you a match for them?
I love that you mentioned that, because I think that's where I think a lot of us really have, or a lot of teachers in general have, this desire, right, to kind of branch out in where they teach. I think a lot of teachers get really stuck in a studio model. And if you're comfortable there and you love teaching in a studio, wonderful. But I think the idea sometimes is branch out, but we don't know what is our target population. How do we reach these people? What areas really want yoga? Who want, right? All these questions that kind of keep us locked into our current model. So, I mean, can you share a little bit? I'll share after, but did you always know that you wanted to work, right, with law enforcement, with military? I mean, I'll say it, you work with a lot of men. You do. You like, that's right, to, and so that can be, that's already a population that, I mean, what is it? The stat is like on average, like 80% of yoga practitioners are women or something like that, and only 20% are men.
Mm-hmm.
So did you just always know? Was it trial and error?
Well, the law enforcement stuff happened recently, like just in the past year and a half. And that was a byproduct of my work I was doing with the military. And a colleague of mine started getting me involved with some of these other arenas because I really had no idea. Though the populations, there's some similarities, there's also a lot of differences. And I've been learning a lot in just how fragmented, too, it is compared to in the military. There's fragmentation, but it's at the end of the day, everybody's sharing the same doctrine, so to speak, or the same regulations and rules. So, but this is, yes, and for, I think, Avery, you might know some of this story. For those who don't know, so back when I was in high school, that's when I got into yoga, and there's more to that story, but today I'm not going to go into that. But I was engaged before I even graduated high school. I ended up marrying my high school sweetheart, and I went to UNCA, so a university in Asheville, North Carolina, and he was, I think, an AIT, and then he ended up getting stationed at Fort Bragg. And I was trying to figure out my life because the right thing, quote unquote, was to go to college and like not ruin my life and run away for love, right? And so while I was in college, I was trying to figure out how do I pursue something that's going to collaborate with a husband who is in the military? And what I really wanted to do was just be a poet, you know? I just wanted to be a poet, maybe teach creative writing. That's what I was trying to do originally. But, you know, they say there's no money in that. So I was like, what am I going to do? And I was going to yoga classes at the university, and my favorite, this teacher who inspired so much in my life, and I had shared with her that my fiance was going to be deploying, and she's like, the next time I saw her for class, she actually gave me a handout of a article about yoga helping soldiers returning from combat that had PTSD. And so when I held this and read it, I was like, that's what I want to do with my life. And that's the truth is I signed up for teacher training. And then eventually he deploys, I start yoga teacher training. And that's when the journey began. He comes home and I moved to Fort Bragg, and I ended up starting to teach. I was fulfilling unit requests and started working with the Wounded Warrior Project. And so that, as I walked though, and I got more experience, it just kept unfolding and kept unfolding. And Averie knows this because I sometimes laugh at this, but every time I like step away from working with the military, something crazy happens that pulls me back in or get involved. So I do feel like there's something with my soul, because I can't really explain why it's just one of those things I know. Like I feel so comfortable teaching in those environments, or teaching even with for law enforcement. It's just something in my soul. So I show up, and I think I'm also really patient, and I also am not trying to sell or convince someone to agree with me. I'm more so trying to understand what their values and interests are, and then connecting the dots to empower them so they're able to have a regulated nervous system. Like I really focus a lot on the nervous system, even in the yoga side of the house, and in trainings I do that too. But with the military, with law enforcement, I really focus on how do we optimize the prefrontal cortex and our nervous system, because those are all doorways into the deeper things. And that's up for them to figure out. That's not my job. But can we condition the environment, our physical environment, for the conditions to be able to source that inner purpose and connection? That was a lot.
But I think there's a lot of people who don't know that, right? And because your work is so deep and has with the military especially, has gone through many different stages. I mean, my gosh, that was how many years ago when Adam first deployed and you began the journey? I mean, what, 10, Mel?
2011 and into 2000.
Yeah, see, yeah. I mean, and so I think that the beautiful thing too is, like you're saying, I just knew for anyone listening, right, who is searching for that population, who is really like, I want to inject myself somewhere, and it might not come that easy. I will share. I mean, my husband is in the service and I have zero, and like, it's not what speaks to me, y'all. It is absolutely, and there's nothing wrong with that. So it's not always what's the closest to you either. That's the interesting thing, because sometimes I think people get really caught up on, well, I came from this, so this is the population that I am adept to serve. I was a teacher, so naturally I should teach yoga to students and such and so forth. So if you are searching, I think it's a lot of trial and error too. Beautiful. I think it's a lot of working with different populations, putting yourself out there, especially in the beginning stages. And we talk about this a lot, finding what isn't for you, because you know you're on the right track. If you're finding what isn't for you, you're just one step closer. Or you can be like Mel and just be born into it knowing.
Well, the truth though is there is so much trial and error because that it was more
Yeah.
of like direction, not decision
Mm,
though. It was more direction.
yeah.
I didn't know what that would look like. And to this day, like I still am figuring out the different textures of how that looks because and actually I got asked to write an article for a yoga therapy magazine on this of like how did I get past red tape? The truth is
Mm,
that most people aren't willing to just do a lot of stuff for free. I did it volunteer, and because no one owned me, like this is specifically with the army, I wasn't owned by anyone, and I did get a flavor of I did long story short is when the pandemic hit and we had to close the studio on Fort Sam. That I mean the year before I just donated and invested a ton to make that happen. I was not about to give up that easy. So when they closed it down, it was then okay, well if this is the case, how do we get this DoD ran? And making those next steps for a position description to come through the GS system, and then get the MOU on the building so that all can move. That led to today, and this all was happening in 2020 and 2021. Now there's the Vogel Meditation Center, which is ran by the DoD. There's a GS yoga therapist leading the facility. And so creating that sustainable, lasting impact that's going to live, getting around red tape, it's not just a easy thing. It's because when I was working for them, sorry, I just sidetracked, but when I was working with them, my hands were so tied, y'all. Like I only worked there for 3 months because I could not handle how tied my hands were. Because before, as a volunteer, I was able to work with this unit and do this and be over there and like all this freedom to innovate. And all of a sudden, working in the system, I wasn't able to do things. I was getting in trouble. Like I was the problem child yoga student, right?
Mel was in her own practice.
Oh, it could have been a sitcom. Y'all,
No.
a funny story is I was like in a meeting. This is like I like don't know why I think this is the funniest thing in hindsight, but I used to get really annoyed because I'd have to sit in these long meetings about like things like the details of like the trees in the front, and this specific one was about a kiosk. And so unrelated to what I'm there to serve and do. But like at this point, we've been talking about a kiosk for over an hour. And I'm like, the yoga in me of patience is just like, I want to go do something else. Like, I can't take this anymore. So I'm like, patient, patient. And then they just keep going on. And I don't know what happened in me. I just stood up, and I wear like heels a lot. I love chunky big shoes. So of course, when I stood up, the chair like made that noise. My heels were loud, and I just got up and like walked out. Like I just left. And when I came back later, everybody was mad at me. And my supervisor, she called me a disgruntled pelican. She
What?
said, she said, you got up like a disgruntled pelican. Like, and I don't know why, but I thought it was the funniest thing. So I started laughing, and like I'm crying laughing, and it ended up making her laugh, and it was funny. But she was like, don't do that again. And I was like, yeah, I can't be here.
Like,
So
don't make me listen to you talk about a kiosk for an hour.
yes, I'm here to teach yoga. Like I can go work with the soldiers or do something. But
Oh,
but the point is that I learned really fast. And this for those who are in systems and working in corporate structures, have compassion for yourself because it's hard to work around red tape when it's tied, like there are expectations with your job, there's all these rules. As a volunteer though, there was a lot more freedom that we could play with, and that I was able to pitch and offer and innovate. And I do think volunteerism is super powerful, but you also have to understand, like with the military, so I created the mental performance and mindfulness training, and I was involved with a handful of other things regarding yoga and mindfulness in the military. And when we were trying to scale it, talking about tactical mobility and making sure we're using language that communicates and relates to the soldiers, right? All of that stuff, volunteer, volunteer, volunteer. It did not mean, though, that I got to be attached to it when it went to big, big army and as things scale, because I was just a volunteer. So there is like a double-edged sword to this kind of work when you're bringing something so new to a population that might not be as aware of it. And like I said, it's trial and error, but I think when your heart's in it, and you don't have to just know. I think that it's more so where you feel called, like who and where is magnetizing. Last thing I'll say on that, because I know I'm just talking, but I'm very passionate about this subject. So last thing I'll say on that is with the magnetism towards it. I also think circumstantially, I found that there's a lot of things I struggled with within the community or with different things or just heartbreaking. And I found for myself that it would be really easy to complain about it. But instead of complaining about it, what if I try to do something about it? What if I try to be the change I want to see and let my work be my prayer? Let my actions be my prayer. And that's what I did.
Oh my goodness. Well, I mean, I like that you say, right, that it wasn't, we have to take note that it's not always easy just because you're serving a population that you feel called to serve, especially with something like government entities, because the red tape is so thick and so dense that it's often, I think that's got to be one of the hardest places to walk in and try and make a change, truthfully, true, like hand to God. So, knowing that it's not without trial, it's not without frustration and being upset and heartbroken sometimes. I mean, did you ever feel like you were like, I'm gonna walk away and I'm gonna take a break? Or like I'm just gonna wash my hand. I know we've talked a couple times and you and I have been so close, so I've heard frustrating stories, but what has kept you really there in moments that you are frustrated and you're like, you want to toss up a big giant middle finger and be like, catch you later?
Well, and here's the thing. So we got to pull in astrology into this for a moment because I can't help it. So oddly, in my chart, Mars, which rules military, is actually debilitated. So learning and understanding that, I already have this compassion that like my journey with it, it's emotional, it's deep, but it's also there's going to be edges and samskaras or challenges that I navigate with it. But Rahu rules Scorpio for me, which is connected to that Mars. So my north node, my Rahu is in Scorpio. So it's work with like the things that are hidden and these deeper places. So that understanding helps me reconcile at those edges. And I think when I step back, it's more, I'll be like, all right, I'm going to take a break. And then a new thing or something happens where I'll get invited to something or asked to fulfill something. And if it feels right, I mean, my highest dream and vision is that, and it's already happening. This is where it's going already. I'd love to be part of it, but I also like trust what God's path for me is. But that it's internal. Like one thing I'm really big about when bringing yoga to places in the community is guiding them so they don't have to outsource it. Because I am not your poster child soldier, okay? And it resonates a lot more when it comes from your drill sergeant or it comes from your NCO or it comes from your top leadership or whoever. So training them to do it. Let's socialize and normalize this in the scope of work. And it's not going to be called, it's going to be called mental performance, emotional capabilities, mindset, right? Like it's using language that they understand. And this is why that going back to cultural literacy is so important. So if we can teach them how to connect the dots, so they're doing the somatic work in the body for nervous system regulation, and you can use yoga practices and these different tools, but it's really about the intention to bring more mental health benefits to the community, injury prevention, emotional capacity for family and loved ones, like all these different things to help keep people coherent and resilient. And resilient is when you bend and you come back, okay? So like a lot of people think it's like, let's just keep bending. How much can I bend? No, it's that you can bend and then come back to coherence, and you're not bringing the residue of your pain or the experience you had into your personal relationships in life. So we'll see. I know that wasn't a simple answer because it's
not simple.
But I will say I am loving working with law enforcement training. I mean, a lot of them are veterans, so it's kind of cool because they already connect to that. But it's so fun to help connect the dots and just seeing how yoga exists. People have no idea. I mean, this is like last week when we were talking about like our grandmother's like windowsill altar or
Yeah.
whatever, like, or their dresser. It's like they don't even know. Like, we're doing it, but what if we just started doing it with more intention? You know?
It's so I love it because I mean, I'll share. I come from a family of law enforcement and I would pay good money to watch my grandfather or my dad, right? Like sit through a yoga class. Like I would just love to be a fly on the wall. Like, but you're so right because I think about if it were myself up there giving this whole spiel, right? And then it's like, wait, what? But then it's like taking that to their higher leadership, I think too, is so powerful. So I love. And like adjacent to that, we talk a lot about like yoga for kids, is teaching teachers, these teachers that teach our kids yoga as well, right? It's the same thing. It's not only bringing it to the population, but bringing it to the figures in the population who can then shed and share and trickle down. Yeah.
Well, and that's why relevance matters and context matters and respecting people's like what they don't know, right? People don't know what they don't know. If I always assume that yoga is for flexible women, well, I'm going to project and have that in my reality that that's what it is. So, like, example, if your grandfather and father were in the room and joined any of these things, what I do is I give context first. I educate. I go like one of my favorites, and for those listening, you can try this. So I'll start. This is a little hack. I'll invite everybody to, or I'll first talk about the nervous system very briefly. About I like to use the human weapon system because that you're hearing that being used in those communities. And it's understanding the electricity in our body, the machine, and the programs running in the machine. And so I give this landscape. We get into the nervous system, a little nerdy, but I like to show there's a connection between body and breath. So notice when your fists are closed and you take a big breath in, and when you sigh it out, and if you open your hands, inhale, big breath in, and sigh it out. Which one's different? And so we're like, oh, hands open, it's easier to breathe. Yes, because posture, structure informs breath, informs mental capacity. I show them how inhales energize, exhales relax, how back bends energize, forward folds relax. So I show them how the somatic structure of your body and what you're doing with your body, it impacts how you feel and your mind. And then getting into debunking some things around flexibility. It's more about mobility. And then we talk about prefrontal. Again, so it's like understanding the why and the relevance, so then people can like have some type of relationship to it, right? Not blind obedience to it, not some superficial. Yeah, I do. I have a frog statue meditating on my front lawn and like yoga, but I don't actually I don't do these practices. Like, we want to help people build a relationship with these practices in themselves. That's why it's got to be relevant, meaningful, and simple for them.
I love that.
Sorry if you have a frog meditating statue, but if you do, this is your sign. You need to get back to your practice.
I think my mom has one. Oh, that's so funny.
But think about it, right? It's like, I think the reason there's a disconnect for a lot of people, and even if you have a membership at a studio and you go and you're like, you only feel like you're able to do these things at the studio, it's because how do we bridge a deep personal relationship with it? It's the permission to make it yours. It's context and understanding why we do what we do. And I also, Averie, I know you know this, but for those who don't, one thing we say at Mel Marie Yoga a lot is self-care is not what you do, it's who you are. So coherence is not what you do, but it's who you are. So the embodiment aspect. That's why, let's just say with law enforcement or any of those communities, I do a lot around showing them in their day-to-day life how to drip these regulation skills and how important it is to train it, right? So it's not about, I have the crisis, now let me go meditate. I have the problem, now let me do my yoga. It can help, but it's more about, I do my yoga so I can navigate my problem. I do my meditations so it's easier to reconcile crisis. So it's front end.
Right. Well, it's proactive care. I mean, truly, right? It's being proactive with our health. And yes, you can use it as a prescription, right? There are absolutely yoga practices and things that you can do to make you feel better after the fact. But we'd be right, like silly to remiss the power that it holds, right, as proactive care. So that way, when you have the crisis, when you're in the midst of the crisis, it's hopefully, right, you have the tools to deal with it, or you have the tools so that when it does happen, you're able to identify more so. Because I think oftentimes in the middle of these big things that happen and then we're shook, we just don't realize what's happening because we're so disembodied in that moment. But that's what yoga does, right? Yoga does what yoga does. It builds the agency of our own, right? Us at our core.
Well, and training that on the front end. And that's the thing, is like, if we can just thread these things through our day to day, then regulation is a byproduct, coherence is a byproduct. And that's how I look at it. Like, some days, yes, I have my magical yoga practice, but really I thread the yummy throughout my day in these different areas.
Okay, so what are some things that you do? Because now I'm just interested, and maybe we share a few and inspire some. I would also love to hear what you all do, thread into your day, because these are so delicious, and I love them.
Wait, I have to tell you the funniest thing before I answer this question.
Oh
So
God.
I saw this video. My husband showed a video of this like woman who was telling about her routines in her day, and her 5-year-old daughter was sitting next to her, but she was telling a bunch of lies, and her daughter was like, "No, you don't." Like, it's the funniest. So yesterday I was like, I wonder what Isla would do. So I was like, "Hey, Isla, will you do this video with me so I can share it with my community? I just want to tell them about my day-to-day routines." And so she's like, "Okay." So she sits next to me, and I'm like, I make breakfast for, we wake up really early, and like all these like things, but it was such a lot. It was
First
all a
lie.
lie. It was all a lie. I was like, and we're getting a pet zebra. And Isla's really good at basketball. She hates like sports. But I mean, to her face, she was like, and then she's like going along with it because she didn't want to like mess up the video. And right after, she was like,
Oh,
"Mom, you're so fake." I was like, good for
what
you.
an angel.
I wanted to see if
Willow
she'd
would have
call me
been like,
out.
"You're wrong. You're lying. She doesn't do that."
Yes,
The
I
difference
know.
in our children.
Her face was like. But so funny you said that, because we just did that yesterday. I was cracking
Oh
up,
my gosh.
and then I told her thank you and sorry for lying and all of that. But I wanted to see if she would call me out. She did.
Oh.
So, but so truthfully, the things I thread throughout the day. First of all, breaks. I take breaks. So I finish something. I'm gonna go sit outside. I'm gonna go I really love going outside, and I like to put my feet on the earth. So walk out, find the dirt, get my feet on the earth, or I'll sit outside and watch the birds. But I like to slow down my day, especially when it's super fast, to have a few moments of just like being and outside. I also note take and journal. We talked about the reminder, like remember drawing the thing that I talked about in like episode 2 or 1. I do
Yeah.
that regularly right now. That's huge. I with my water, I always set an intention when I fill it up that it's going to nourish me, and when every time I drink water, I say thank you in my mind. Like, just being in relationship with my water.
I love that. I have not heard that one before. And actually, it's so simple, but I really love that.
Yeah, and the thing too, and just for those listening, is anytime you're trying to implement these things as patterns, it
Mm.
gets easier and becomes default. Like, I mean, I'm always like fiending for my water because I feel like I've made like a ceremony, a living ceremony with it, and I always want my water near me. And just how you create your environments. So, like how I set up the space. And then last thing recently, I've been like thinking about as we're navigating a lot of changes in our personal life and things. I've been really in journaling and I would say more not prayer, but more of listening to the woman I want to become in the future. And so
Mhm.
I went shopping and I dressed like this is part of my haul of what I got. But like, how do I dress and what jewelry I use and like all of it for the art of embodiment. So those are practices. And if I get lucky, I might get a meditation in. If I get lucky, usually I move my body at some point. That's just usually in my breaks or whenever.
Yeah.
Think. What about you? What are your things right now?
This sounds so silly. So I've gotten back to, I keep a morning journal. It's the only time throughout the day that I feel called to write. And for years, I've always just kept a morning journal. It's on my nightstand. Generally, it's one of the first things I do, right? Is I get up and I'm not a big journaler. Like I'll share with you guys. I'm just, it's not my mode. Um, but I jot down 3 to 5 things that I'm grateful for that morning. Right. And it really, there's a lot of buzz around gratitude journaling. I will say I've done it for years and I lose touch with it sometimes, but I always feel so much better, right, when it's an active practice. Another one, and this sounds so silly, when I wash the dishes. I hate doing dishes. It is, I like, it's just my least favorite house chore.
Yep.
And so I would find myself like dreading it, especially the last like 6 months. My husband's been gone. It's been really easy to be like, I'm just not doing dishes, like another day, whatever. We don't have that many. It's 2 of us. But I was like, I am going to turn this into a mindfulness and sensory activity. So every time I wash the dishes, I am actively engaged with the dishes. How does the soap feel on my hands? What does this smell like? How is my hand moving? Right? It's very very intentional. Um and it feels so good. It's like because that's one of those times where you're like, "Oh, you're doing something you don't like, it's icky, you want to get it through it, you're autopiloting through it." So I'm like, I'm gonna, and you know what, I don't mind washing the dishes. Is it still my favorite thing? No, but it's a practice that I'm like, oh,
Well,
this is actually great.
this is the art of making it cozy. And okay,
Mm.
you're embodying the perfect example to what we were talking about earlier. Is that a lot of these tools, if we can apply it in a relevant and meaningful way to enrich our experiences and things we're already doing, because that's another thing is I think a big mistake yoga teachers make, or just with how do we scale yoga in the collective, is that we go and say, hey, I can teach a yoga class, or hey, I can do this for you. And we're not listening or assessing how to make it relevant to the interest of them and fitting it into something naturally. Because if we, and y'all know this, you start to add a new routine to your life, it's not easy to add new routines or add more things. But if you take inquiry into what you're already doing, and I love Averie hit the nail on the head on my least favorite. I hate dishes. I think part of it is, I mean, I chew my nails, right? And it hurts. I hate getting my hands wet like that, like with the soap. So I
Yeah.
have like this baby whiny excuse, but I love my dishwasher and I will sometimes dishwash twice if I forget. Um, but like taking something you don't love, and then how do we bring these different traits, right? Mindfulness, sensory input, intention, and how it can completely transform the experience you're having.
Well, and I've done it with, I'll just share, like my kid does not like brushing her teeth. It is, it is something that she just doesn't enjoy. The toothpaste is spicy. It's like all the things. And so, right, I'm like, well, let's turn it into a mindfulness activity. How does it feel, right, on your teeth when your toothbrush is vibrating? Right? Notice how your hand's moving. What does it taste like? What does it smell like? Be really immersed. And that's teaching her in a small, hopefully we get 2 minutes of brushing our teeth in, right? Just this little teeny tiny mindfulness. And we like to call it, right, like habit stacking. We're just stacking our mindfulness on top of something that we are already doing and being really, really present and in the senses and in the body while we're doing it.
I love that. And it's even taking, like, naming things in our life like a new way, like the water example.
Yeah.
Um, I also do it with my car. I feel like my car is, and again, it sounds so silly saying out loud, but I love my car. It's very intentional to me because I Voxer a lot with my clients. So I do a lot of mentoring. It's a space, it's like a portal. So I have all this intention. Now, I live in San Antonio. It is chaotic out there driving. I actually prefer to avoid, I'm like, give me the back roads. I mean, being in North Carolina this past week, I'm not gonna lie. I'm like, I want to go back. I miss the small town energy. I was like, oh, if I lived here, oh, it'd be so cozy. But being in, with how chaotic it can be driving in San Antonio, by making my car like a living, like, ritual in a way, just something so intentional of how I'm in relationship when I get in and how I feel supported by it. Like, as silly as all that stuff says, and I made the conscious choice to start saying that about my car. I made the conscious choice to start perceiving my vehicle in that way. And it's changed my entire experience while I'm driving around San Antonio. I'm like floating on the interstate, like sending love bubbles to everybody because I'm just in a different, and it's practice. I'm going to be in the car anyway. So it's just practicing new states of beingness, like how we're operating from. So with the toothbrush, it's like, well, what does this represent? And like setting those, like you said, stacking the habits, but bringing that mindfulness tone. Gosh, I'm like, my worry, I was like, okay, if we do a podcast this past year, as I'm thinking about doing podcasts, I'm like, either I'm gonna sound like a total weirdo if I start exposing like the butterflies and hummingbirds and unicorns that exist in my mind. It's my Pisces moon in Western.
That's all good. Wait, you are not a Pisces moon.
In Western,
I'm Pisces moon. But
maybe.
Vedic.
Yeah.
Vedic for
Oh,
sure.
in Vedic, so your soul has the Pisces moon. Yeah.
I don't, truthfully, I'm so disconnected from my Western chart at times. And I think it's just because my Vedic just resonates so much more.
Well, and remember, it's like the external versus the internal. So
Internal, yeah.
as I'm sharing things, how my mind thinks, it can be super, literally. I mean, this is very Piscean, what I'm wearing. It's very like rainbow and like soft and sweet, like the way it comes out, but where it's coming from is very Aquarian. So you can
Is that it? Hold on, hold your shirt. Is that a disgruntled pelican on?
No, it's a peace dove, and that's what happened when
Oh.
I quit. Peace. That's a crazy season of my
Oh my
life.
God, I cannot. I just would love to be there while you're in that environment.
I swear it would be such a good, like, Netflix is missing out. I should just give them the past like few years of my life, and it'd be a great, like, hilarious sitcom. So
Oh yeah.
can't make it up. But no, I mean, full circle back. I think that the awareness of how we bring this to people, making it relevant for our lives, that's the key. It's not forcing people to fit into our perspective of how we think it's supposed to work, but rather asking people to discover with these different tools, how does it work for them?
Right. And I think it's coming back to that element of compassion from the very beginning. If we want to circle back, it's like we are able, I think, to meet people with the most compassion when we're in spaces that we really feel called to be in and working with the people that we really feel, right, called to serve.
I love that because people are people. At the end of the day, we're all human. And the moment we forget that, like, we've been at different parts of our journey, or just we don't know what we don't know. Like, I mean, if you don't have a sign for the towel to clean up sweat and like, or I didn't know that I dripped my sweat there. Like, I didn't know, right? Like, we can't
Right.
take everything so personally. And I think by having that compassion, like Avery just mentioned, it's liberating. And then it also allows that, just like the supportive environment to exist, which, you know, that's why I say yoga's like ice cream. You got to find the flavor that works for you. There's going to be flavors you don't like. Studios or experiences, if it felt weird or not supportive or whatever, just keep trying. Find the ice cream flavor you love because it's there.
Yes. Same goes for teachers too. We talk a lot about students finding their flavor, but like teachers got to find their flavor too.
You get to do it your way. So we really do. What an amazing like gift that we really, as humans, whether you're a yoga teacher or not, like you really
Oh,
can
so cool.
innovate, right? Like you can innovate anything in the way, like we can create anything we want.
Anything. I mean, I'll share. I like, something like I love working with like the older population, with like the aging. And I'm like, I never thought that I would work right with older people in my life. Like that's just not something. But then I, again, trying out the flavors, and I'm like, wow, I love it here. Right. It's like, so find the spaces, find your people, you know.
Well, thank you. I know I shared a lot about my personal, some of the personal background with the military, but thank you for this was a juicy conversation. I hope that those listening found some things to resource from and get inspired from. And we also love topic requests. We will be having more guests coming soon. So don't hold back if you have any requests for stuff for Avery and I to dive into.
Yeah. Well, thanks, y'all.